Hello and welcome on this fine early summer evening to central Edinburgh. You join us for the last of our current encounters on our Walk by Design, introducing the new programme Concrete Designs to Thrive. My name's John Ennis, curator, producer at Journeys in Design. You join us actually on World Clean Air Day, and that's giving us the opportunity to have a think about the intimate link between concrete, design and the planet. And I'm absolutely delighted to be joined this evening by Dr Peter Wilkie from the Royal Botanic Gardens in Edinburgh. Peter, good to see you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, so we're going to take a little walk, and there's lots of lovely tie-ins here. We're standing beside a recently developed Physic Garden, which in fact was the site of the first Botanic Gardens in Edinburgh. Peter, you've been there since, we'll go this way, shall we?
Okay.
You've been there since 1992, I think.
Yep.
This garden has had quite an extensive history. 1670 here, then second site on what is now, I believe, platform 11 at Waverley Station.
Yep.
And then, quite famously, to Sir John Hope, or Professor John Hope's grounds to the west of Leith Walk.
Yep, that's right, very close to where I live. Yep.
Close to where you live. And close, therefore, and you'll have seen this amazing development of what is now in Inverleith Botanic Gardens, the Botanic Garden Cottage. What an extraordinary bit of conservative surgery that was.
It was amazing. It was looking quite sad on Leith Walk. I didn't believe it when I saw it opening up in the Botanic Gardens in Inverleith.
Absolutely amazing.
And the fact that it's been repurposed and is really engaging the community with the work of the gardens
beautiful.
is so nice.
Such a beautiful bit of architectural restoration and design. And as you say, repurposing. One of the realities of our Concrete Designs to Thrive programme is that we're quite clear the greenest building is the one already built.
Yeah.
Now, the other underlying theme, if you like, for our walk in Edinburgh has been the legacy of Sir Patrick Geddes, and his spirit looms large throughout the old town. We've just walked past an area called the Watergate at the bottom of the Royal Mile, or Canongate. Here we are in Holyrood, and that was conserved by Patrick Geddes in 1890 and then redeveloped in 1970 in quite a sympathetic way. And here we are outside the Queen's Gallery. Now, why would I mention that? Well,
I'm sure you're going to tell me.
Yeah, I am. It gives us a great opportunity to say thank you to Lewith Press and the writings of Walter Stephen, who was chairperson of the Patrick Geddes Memorial Trust. Wonderful set of range of books that certainly informed me about Patrick Geddes and places and spaces associated with Edinburgh. Queen's Gallery was developed from an existing old schoolhouse by Ben Tyndall, a wonderful conservation architect in Edinburgh, who was also a chairperson of the Patrick Geddes Memorial Trust. Look, it's a bit busy, but we're going to press the crossing and hope for a favourable wind. Is that us, or will we? Well, oh, here we go.
We can do it.
We're okay. So we're out of the direct sun, but we're where, you know, if one thinks of concrete and the theme vote, you can only but think of this extraordinary building, the Scottish Parliament. When we come back to Edinburgh in our seven city tour over the next 3 years, we'll have focus on this building once again. Now, World Clean Air Day, Patrick Geddes' internationalism. It puts me in mind of the intimate link. We share the same air, we share the same seas. We're all interconnected in an ecological and green sense, but in a very real sense with the building industry as well. Now, you're at the Botanic Gardens. Can you, and you're a Scotsman and I think an internationalist, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, very much so.
Could you give us a little hint or a little taste of how you came to be where you are with the botanics through your training in Scotland?
Yeah. It's quite a strange, unpredicted, there wasn't a plan where I ended up here.
Always the best way.
But growing up in the East End of Glasgow, I didn't think I'd be a tropical botanist working at the Royal Botanic Gardens Edinburgh, that was for sure. But I always had an interest in plants, and so growing up in Easterhouse in Glasgow, I then, to cut a long story short, ended up going to college to study lab technicianship, got a job based on that, and from that, the concept of university was introduced to me. It was
and you really had been a bit of a non-starter in your thinking until that point.
Exactly, and worked there for 4 years and then left to go to university. It was Stirling University, to study ecology, and I had a fantastic professor, Professor Proctor, who was passionate about rainforests in Brunei, and I did my last year thesis with him, the honours thesis with him, and that led to me going to Brunei.
You actually went?
So I went to Brunei for 6 weeks as part of my undergraduate thesis. And that led me to meet a guy called Dr George Argent, who is deceased now but worked at the Botanic Gardens Edinburgh. And about 3 years later I bumped into him and ended up doing some contract work for him at the Botanic Gardens after I finished my undergraduate degree and moved to Edinburgh. And that led me to go to Indonesia to do some inventory work of the rainforests there.
Amazing, with this chap
with George Argent, and he came for 6 weeks and then headed off back to Edinburgh, and I was left there for 6 months
to do the graft.
Yeah. And then over the next 6 years I spent half of every year in Kalimantan, which is the Indonesian part of Borneo. But as part of that, it was in contract work, so I ended up doing a master's at Edinburgh University part-time.
Wonderful, right.
So using the data I was collecting on the ethnobotanical, the uses of plants in Borneo, the island of Borneo. And then after that got a permanent job at the Botanic Gardens and did a part-time PhD in taxonomy, which is the classification and naming of plants. And 28 years later, I'm still at the Botanic Gardens, working in Southeast Asia. So quite strange. I wouldn't have predicted it, and I don't quite know how I got here.
But there we are.
The story.
What a wonderful career trajectory. Maybe we'll just walk on and we'll reflect on. Everyone has a different relationship with this building. When it first went up, I wasn't sure, but the more I'm with it, Edinburgh is one of these extraordinary cities when you can find yourself in a bit of a mood for whatever reason and then go out for a walk in a green space or in this amazing architecture and, you know, be uplifted. And something about the intuitive sense that our surroundings can lift our spirits is another element of our Concrete Designs to Thrive walk. What's your take on the building?
I like the building, but it's taken me a bit like you a while to start to enjoy it. I wouldn't say it uplifts me, but the surrounding green environment uplifts me, but that it adds to it in some way.
Do you know, one of the other things we're doing is looking at the flirtation between photography and the built environment. And if you get these wonderful artist impressions of new concrete buildings and you see, you know, happy people walking through trees and the green background, there's something rather beautiful about, and the capacity actually to photograph concrete building in a green landscape. They sing to each other in a funny sort of way. But if we can think about your work, and in particular, what was news to me when we started to talk, the link between concrete and biodiversity. To invert Patrick Geddes's phrase, we're acting locally, but if we can think globally about biodiversity on this World Clean Air Day, you've really helped me understand one aspect of that.
Yeah, it was quite interesting when you talked about concrete, because my first reaction was, oh, I don't particularly like concrete. I might like it in architecture, but when you look at how it's sourced and the environmental impact of sourcing the raw materials for cement and concrete, then I every day deal with species that are going extinct because of cement production.
So this is the absolutely crucial bit of thinking, and it's completely new to me. Thank you to your discussions. We're aware that 8 to 10% of world CO2 emissions are due to concrete. 40% of landfill in Scotland is from the construction industry. So when we think about the circular economy, we also have to think about supply chains. And you got me thinking about, okay, so what is concrete? Aggregate, sand, water and cement. What is cement? Well, we largely know it as Portland cement. And that got its name from the Portland stone that it looked like in the 1820s, I think. But it's limestone mixed with clay. Where do you get limestone? And this is where you're extraordinary.
Yep. So I had a sabbatical in Malaysia 2010 and 11, and I was working at the Forestry Research Institute in Malaysia, and there's quite a few researchers there who are very interested in limestone plants that only grow in limestone. We call them endemics. They don't grow anywhere else other than that kind of habitat.
So already I'm thinking Southeast Asia must be a source of limestone.
Yep. And so as part of my sabbatical, I was doing lots of field work, collecting plants, bringing them back for identification, and gathering more information about species distributions.
How long of the year would you spend out in places like this?
Usually nowadays probably about 6 weeks to 2 6-week trips a year, but in the early days it was half a year at a time. But during the sabbatical that was just over a year full time. But so, as that, we spent a lot of time going up and down the country, and I was constantly passing by these mountains. This karst formation, it's a topography of limestone where
karst formation of limestone.
It's very sheer, and then but because limestone is very soluble, there's lots of nooks and crannies and caves, and it's very jagged, and they're very difficult to work in and collect in.
So I'm getting a picture of a peaked mountain, is it, or?
Yeah. It's a bit like a sandcastle where somebody scraped around it, and you've got developed fields around it, and then
which
you've got your
sandcastle
in the middle,
right?
Which is covered in plants, and the edges of it are straight up and down.
Wow. So this was your field work at that time. Let's take a wee walk up here and see more of this building as we talk.
So so I was going back and forward, and I wanted to go to some limestone areas, but they're notoriously difficult to collect in, just because they're very sharp, steep, and a bit dangerous. But what was interesting, I did manage to get to some limestone areas, but each time I went back up to that area, more and more of the mountain was disappearing, or the hills were disappearing, and that was a cement company essentially blasting the material out of the mountain. And for me, there's lots of endemic plants that occur nowhere else but that mountain, that were going extinct. But also, it's not just plants, it's snails are particularly restricted to limestone areas and only found there, and they're going extinct at an extortionate rate.
Literally, you're on this field trip, you're going back and forward, you're seeing this karst, did you say, peaks of limestone, and they're literally being pockmarked by
they're
explosion.
just being sheared off, a bit like some of the quarries you see in Scotland, where they're just slowly now shearing bits off, grinding it up and taking it to whoever is wanting to buy cement.
Right, but the significant thing about this is, with each blast, we're losing species. Directly. Directly, when we call for cement, we may be losing. So have you had an opportunity to document any of this?
Not me particularly, because there's the specialists in it, but there's a
Your
Dr.
colleagues
in Malaysia, and she's world famous for knowing about the limestone flora, and she's very active of trying to raise awareness at government level about the impact of cement mining. But it brings in a phenomenal amount of money, and so it's the balance between economic development and environmental impact.
Of course. It also strikes me that as a potential consumer, whether I'm a builder or one of the big building companies, or whether I'm just doing some work in my garden and needs the cement, I don't know about that. I don't know about the ecological value. I know the cost of a bag of cement, and it's cheap, but I don't know the ecological value that implies when I buy it.
I think that's a big problem. Cement's seen as cheap, and so therefore people don't think they don't value it. But if they understood the environmental impact, then they would think twice about, do I need to use cement? Is there an alternative? Or do we actually just need to use cement, full stop? Do we need to do what we need to do? Reduce, reuse, recycle.
It's got to be our mantra, hasn't it? If we're really saying that amount of landfill and that amount of CO2 going into the air is directly related to that need for more cement, we have to rethink that. And that's really a very key element to Concrete Designs to Thrive, the programme. The other thing, coming back to Patrick Geddes, is the utility and the extraordinary benefits of having green biodiverse areas in the city itself. He was responsible for conservative surgery at the time and creating green garden spaces, some of which we've seen on our programme walk. Let's have a little walk back here to this landscape of the Scottish Parliament. Now, when it was designed by Morellis and Rumjum, there was particular attention paid to the species that were put out in this landscape, but apparently to capture something of the national landscape by including a lot of different Scottish plants. More significantly, and of late, has been the push to allow for more meadow planting to attract bees and in particular butterflies. And there have been sightings of unexpected butterfly species in these lawns. Now, again, let's go back to thinking global but acting local. The Botanics are leading a couple of interesting projects. You have one or two colleagues involved in that?
Yeah, it's a horticulturally driven initiative, but it's very much trying to encourage people to not have a monoculture, i.e. one species of grass in their lawn, but actually let it grow a bit and let it become more diverse, because the more diverse the planting is, the more diverse other types of wildlife interact with it.
I mean, it's a great, I've been on the website, there's a great little demonstrator project there. I think there's a couple of areas in the gardens themselves, and one of your colleagues is involved directly in that, and working with Edinburgh Council and other Scottish Wildlife Trust to look at biodiversity in urban plots. And I think I basically heard the latest trend in gardens that way is called no mow May.
No mow May, yep.
Which you'll know about. But literally, not mowing your lawn lower than 5 centimetres and dispersing some Scottish native plant seeds, it feeds like a lawn doesn't.
Yeah, yep.
It offers nectar. And look, cue the bees around these little... I would be putting you in the spot to say, tell me what that plant is,
Peter. It's some kind of legume, but I'm not sure what species.
That'll do me. That'll do me. But look, there it is in the evidence if ever it was needed.
But what's quite interesting is the Parliament and the outside's encouraging biodiversity and green spaces and the juxtaposition with the concrete. The legislation in there I was kind of reading up when I knew I was coming to have a talk with you, is that there's NBSAP's National Biodiversity Action Plans, and there is one for Scotland on limestone, but they're called limestone pavements. So we don't have these large hills or mountains, but we do have limestone pavements, mainly up in Sutherland, that part of the world.
Right.
And they've got a distinct flora, and there is an action plan that the government's got, the Scottish government's got, that feeds into these global initiatives. And you might know from Ireland, the Burren is world famous for holding 70% of Ireland's flora.
Extraordinary. Yeah. I'm really delighted you've brought that back, because the theme of tonight is vote. And in terms of legislature, we are often led, and cultural change happen when our lawmakers take that. I'm very proud to be, although from Northern Ireland, a citizen of Scotland, and to know that we are in many ways leading in the notion of a well-being economy and a circular economy. And those are very key aspects in terms of legislation that we'll come back to. Thank you very much. Peter, what a cracking chat. Really enjoyable. I've learnt so much, and I know that we'll be continuing the conversations. Are you heading off anywhere in the next short while?
I've got no big plans at the moment. COVID's holding everything back, but I'm in regular contact with my collaborators in Indonesia and Malaysia.
Wonderful.
And they continue doing the work. I'm setting up a PhD with someone in Singapore.
Fantastic.
Who's hopefully going to be looking at the biodiversity of what's really interesting, urban planting as a role for genetic flow in endangered species in Singapore. So that's a really interesting, very early stages, but
we'll keep tabs.
Interesting thing.
So you're now supervising a PhD?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Listen, thanks again so much. We'll leave everyone tonight with the amazing view of Salisbury Crag, the meadow planting in the landscape of the Scottish Parliament, and this seat of Scottish literature, the Parliament buildings behind us. Thanks very much for joining us on this walk by design, and we hope to meet you again and continue the journey with our Concrete Designs programme, launching on the ground from next year and visiting all 7 of Scotland's cities. Thank you.